Amy Stein, welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you.
I've been looking forward to having you here since we started filming, one of the last guests of our first season. And the reason you're here is because you have a super unique perspective on a world that everyone in the startup world touches on, which is HR, human resources. You've been doing that for 15 years or more in various organizations, and I knew how helpful your experience was to me when I needed it. So I figured this would be a great gift to our readers. With that, I'd like to start with something a little bit more basic, and that's who you are, what do you do, and why do you do it?
Wow, that I should have that right off the cuff, shouldn't I? It should be the easy answer. It'd be quite good. We've rebranded HR. We don't call it HR anymore. We call it people operations now in
Okay.
the trendy world, but I'm happy to still be seen as an HR professional.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. My official job title is head of people. I work for an architecture firm in central London at the moment that does very design-led, innovative, thoughtful buildings. And previous to that, I've worked in other architecture firms. I've worked in fashion publishing at Condé Nast. I've worked in contemporary art at a, again, central London gallery called White Cube. And I've always worked with creative teams and tried to set up people functions and people processes that work with what the business is trying to achieve in the world. I don't come from a traditional HR background. I don't have an HR degree. I came into HR through an operational background. I had owned my own business, run my own business, and I was brought in to an HR team to help the HR team become more connected operationally to the business. So my background is very much, I understand what it is to run your own business. I know the challenges that operational managers are facing. And whenever I'm creating people strategy, I always go back to what are the challenges that the teams are facing, and let's make the people strategy match that. So a lot of what I do in HR doesn't feel like textbook HR because it isn't.
Let's start with people strategy. What is it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people strategy usually looks across some traditional areas. So who are we hiring? So recruitment. Who are we hiring? How many people are we hiring? Why are we hiring them? Who do we want to join the business? Then it looks at development, talent development. So once someone joins the business, what's their path? How are they going to learn and develop? What are they, people want to know that, especially now, the new generation coming to the workforce. They want to understand, what am I going to learn?
Yeah, what's in it for me?
What's in it for me? What's my career development? So we look across talent development. We also look across pay and compensation. So why are people paid what they're paid? How much compensation is fixed versus bonus? Things like that. Then we also look at how all those pieces work together. So you've got the operational side of HR, contracts, employment law, all the paperwork. How does that support the bigger, meatier pieces of talent development and recruitment? Who's working on what? Why are they doing that? How do teams work really effectively if you're a team-based organization? A lot of the creative teams I work with struggle with this idea of really strong individual contributors. They can do their job really well, but they don't play well in a team. And this is a really big challenge for a lot of creative teams, because when someone's a really strong individual contributor, they feel innately like they must be right, but then they can't work on a team. They're not right.
Yeah.
And that can be a really hard thing for people to give up. So that, how does the team work? And making sure that everything's in alignment. So, the architects I'm working with now, if they're hitting disruption in their industry around how designs are made. Designs used to be made on a big sheet of paper with a pen and pencil. Designs are now made almost entirely on the computer, or now into 3D visualization. It's been a huge change in the industry. What does that mean in terms of the talent and people that are working there?
Because you could have been a person employed in that firm for 20 years.
That's right.
Exceptionally good at that method of doing things, and all of a sudden you need to go back and become more digitally proficient.
But that's impossible. I mean, it is literally impossible, right? So you have to think, well, then what is the new role that you have in the team? It's about changing the role that you have in the team and what you contribute. And, you know, it was similar when I was at Condé Nast. I was at a very interesting time when iPads were first coming out. I mean, to the point where one of the hilarious things I did with the senior team was get all the publishers and editors together and take them down to the Apple store in Covent Garden that had just opened up and do a session on how do you turn your iPad sideways? What is it? How does it work? Because no one knew what they were. I mean, there were these new things, and publishing has gone digital, right? And here's this company that for hundreds of years have been producing paper magazines. And all of a sudden, all the creative teams were being faced with, it's not enough anymore to just produce your paper magazine, which you thought was stressful enough. Now you have to produce both a PDF version for Kindle readers and an Apple, Amazon Fire version for Fires, and a version that will work on iPad, and a version that will work in one orientation and another orientation, and that will have video embedded into it. So, you know, how do you help a creative team through a massive period of change and disruption like that?
Got it. You said something about the individuals who now have to start work in a team, and how that changes their output and the quality of their work. Why is that an HR problem versus that specific team manager's problem?
Well, I think if you're a good HR person, part of what you're doing is you're helping managers build their leadership skills. So part of what you're doing is helping managers learn how to manage, because people don't often come into a management role knowing how to manage. People are often promoted into management because they're good technically at their job, not because they know how to get the best out of a team.
Especially in creative industries, I guess.
Yeah, but in every job, it doesn't matter. I mean, I started my HR career in retail. It was the same in retail.
Okay.
You know, someone is good at what they do, so they get promoted up the chain. And there's lots of cliches and good terms for that syndrome. But it's very well known, and most people would recognize that.
That you get stuck at the job where you're underperforming.
Yeah, exactly. And what you used to be good at, you're not allowed to do anymore. And now you've got a job where you actually don't know how to do it. You don't know how to manage through the team. You only know how to contribute.
So HR comes in because we could have promoted a manager that might be a good manager eventually, but now for the whole show to keep going, they might need some help.
Yeah,
excellent.
But it's not just that, it's also recruitment. So it's about understanding, when you're hiring people, it's about understanding, do you need a technical specialist who's really, you know, able to contribute? And teams do need those, right? But then you need to make sure if you hire that technical specialist who's really good at an independent role, right, that what they're not put in a position on the team where they have to be collaborative, right? Because they're just going to fail, and the team's going to hate them, and they're not going to be successful. So it's also understanding that not everyone can move across roles, and especially in a startup situation where you're a small team, there's this idea we all have to be flexible. We all have to be able to work across 3 or 4 different roles. But in reality, sometimes to get the output that you need to allow some people to be in a single channel. And so it's helping managers understand that, you know, that it's not everyone isn't an all-rounder, and that's okay. But you need to be really careful when you're resourcing that person, that you're not putting them in a position where they have to be an all-rounder if that's not what their skill set is. And so also when you're recruiting, you look at communication skills and team working skills, if you want them to work in a team environment effectively.
Yeah. I want to draw some comparisons into the startup world, because I knew how good you are at what you do, given the advice you've given me, but I couldn't draw the parallels between doing people operations role for architecture firms or creative industries and then startups. So yes, startups do have to use their people operations to recruit, for talent strategies, pay and compensation, keeping everyone in sync, but it did strike me a little different. Like the pace of work, the volatility, working with founders versus working with professional geniuses in ways. So can you help me draw the comparison between these two worlds?
So I think the challenges faced by a startup is you often don't have an HR professional there, right? So you need to be able to put your hands onto resources really quickly. Or have the right people around you on the end of the phone that you can call, know who to ask for advice for what. And I think that's, you don't have the resources you have in a large organization.
Yeah, right? I'm smiling because it's half of the solution is knowing whose advice to ask.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think in the conversation we had, and I think in a lot of startups this happens, you're having a performance issue, for example, with an employee, and what happens is you end up calling the employment lawyer, because you're a little bit worried, this might get into a legal situation. And you're not going to get good quality advice about how to manage people from an employment lawyer, because employment lawyers know how to get people in and out of court. They know how to settle with people, but they don't know the subtleties of actually how to avoid that whole process. Because often what you're trying to do is you want to manage it so that you don't end up with the lawyers. But a lot of small startups would feel like, well, the lawyer's the person they go to for their people advice. So that's a sort of really classic mistake, right? And then you end up in a confrontation that you don't need to be in.
Yeah, which I've done. And when I called you with that, listen, I'm getting this advice from a lawyer, and you're like, Tal, lawyers, they minimize risk. That is their job. They minimize the company's exposure, but they don't think people first, and they don't know how to create the win-win outcomes.
Yeah, no. And because they just want to protect you, and that's what you're paying them for.
Yeah.
And if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be doing their job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think from a startup situation, is that thing about knowing who to ask for advice, knowing what resources to go to. So what are good books to read or what are good websites to read, and understanding, I think, that some of the misinformation that's out there about how to manage people. Like, for example, my husband, who worked for a startup, dealt with this situation where there was an idea that paying people motivated them. Right? So there's this idea like, and the founder would constantly be saying, but I'm paying this person a good wage. Why isn't that enough? And there's this great myth. I mean, one of the things you asked me to think about for this podcast was, what are some of the HR myths? And I think there is this myth, if you pay people enough by default, that will make them perform. And in fact, it's a very complex relationship. The relationship between pay and performance is not that simple.
It's not that simple, especially in startups where time is often a more valuable resource than money. And if you can accelerate something or solve a problem with throwing money at it, it's sometimes the better solution, but it doesn't always apply well when it comes to people, motivation, performance.
No, in fact, and sometimes it can have the opposite effect, right? So you have to be very, very careful where you go with that.
What's the opposite effect if I want to keep someone at a job they don't enjoy doing? I'm like, listen, I'm going to give you a 30% pay raise, just keep doing that. How can that go wrong?
Well, what goes wrong is that the message that you're giving that person is that it's a motivator, which is not about feeling a sense of purpose, right? And people need a sense of purpose to feel motivated in their job, and being paid, giving them more money doesn't make them feel more engaged. It doesn't give them that sense of purpose. So what will happen often, and this is a real sort of, any person who works in HR will realize this, if someone's about to leave and you say, no, stay, I'll give you an extra $5,000, on average, they will end up quitting 6 months later anyway. It just doesn't last, because most people, that amount of money isn't enough to solve their underlying problem. If they're not connecting, if they're not feeling either recognized, or they're not feeling that sense of purpose, or they're not feeling a sense of control over their job, that having a sense of control over what they're doing is really important to people. So it doesn't last long. It's like a Band-Aid solution.
Has it always been the case that purpose has such an important role in people's lives? Because to me, it could sometimes sound like some sort of those millennial at the workforce type thing. They need purpose. Plant trees and they will love you for it.
Well, that's social responsibility, and I mean the whole idea of corporate social responsibility. I'm old enough to know how trendy this was in the 80s. It kind of was trendy and it went away, and now it's come back, which is yahoo. I'm a big fan of it. I think it's great, but I think I'm not talking necessarily just about social responsibility purpose, which you're right is very trendy right now. I'm talking about that feeling that the job that you do every day makes a difference, and you know why you're doing it. And I think that's always been there for people. And most people will say, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Are you hitting the snooze button every morning, or are you jumping out of bed because you feel like you've got something you need to get done that day? That's hugely motivational for people. And I think it always has been. The wider, are we also giving money to charity? Are we taking care of the environment? Social purpose does have a role to play. And especially with new people in the workforce right now, it is very trendy. But I'm talking about a deeper personal sense of purpose.
Got it. And while we're on the topic, it's anecdotal, but I think it's interesting. So let's see if we can clear this out really quickly. The situation in which an employee comes to their employer with a counter offer saying, listen, I've been unhappy for a while, whether they say it or don't, I don't know, but I've got this offer from this company. They're paying me 15%, 20% more, and get a bump in my seniority. You have to understand. Either you match or I'm out the door.
Yeah.
Is that a common situation?
Yeah, and the best way to handle that situation is to think about what really matters. So what really matters? What's underneath? If you're feeling happy in your job and that email from the recruiter comes in that says, "So do you want to meet for a coffee? I've got a job." If you're feeling happy, you don't reply to that email. It's as simple as that. If you reply to that email, it's a sign that something else is going on. So then it's a conversation with that person saying, what's really, tell me about that. What are you missing? And often it will have something to do with they're being micromanaged, or they don't see a career path for themselves, or they don't have any hope, or there's an unresolved conflict in the team and they just can't face, they don't know how to deal with that conflict, so they'd like to run away from it. There's always something, just scratch the surface, and there's always something else going on. And that's why throwing money at it doesn't work, because you throw the money at it, and in fact, the underlying problem hasn't changed. And that's why it doesn't last. And not only that, but it can cause massive issues of inequity in the team, because what you don't want to be doing is sending a message to the team that says, if someone complains, then they get more money. And we go back to this issue of pay strategy. I mean, these ideas aren't original to me. There's some really great thinkers out there. I would say read Dan Pink if you're interested in
Dan Pink.
Vision. Yeah. And
all of the books that you'll mention will be on the show notes. So Dan Pink.
We'll do it. But he wrote a really good book called Drive. It sort of made his reputation has sort of taken off now on the back of Drive. And it is a good book. And he talks about these sort of drivers of motivation being autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think those are the things, even in a pay conversation, you want to be talking about. What's missing with one of those three drivers? Something's going to be really wrong if someone's coming to you with a counteroffer. And unless you get to the bottom of what they want and really solve the underlying problem, then they probably should go. It's probably the best thing.
Okay, but I'll be a little bit more scrutinizing in that, because I'd be interested in the employer's perspective. If a person comes to me with a counteroffer, I could say I could be as a progressive and empathic as you are, but I could also be like, what are you trying to do here? Like, this is leverage. If you want to work for someone else, go work for someone else and take it personally and immediately react to that, rather than use that as a start of a new conversation.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic point, because I think what's happening in that situation again is never take anything personally at work. I mean, is that one piece of advice everyone can take away from this podcast? Never take anything personally. It is not about you. It really isn't. If someone comes to you with and this is something, when you're a founder, when you've just started your own business, everything feels like it's all about you, because it's your baby. You've just started it, and it feels really personal. And these founders, and I've, probably with the exception of Condé Nast, spent my career working with companies that are single owner founder companies. And can be quite hard to have that separation. It feels like you're not just quitting a job, you're leaving me. And I've actually heard founders say that to me. He's leaving me. How could he leave me? And you're like, for goodness sakes, you're not 16. It's not your first girlfriend. It's a work situation. It's okay. But it doesn't feel, the emotions really get in the room. And I think, so rule number one, never take anything personally. And rule number two, if someone's having a conversation like that, it's a red flag. It's the same kind of red flag that you get if someone's calling in sick every Monday. They're telling you something. They're not telling you directly. They're telling you they're unhappy in their job, right? And if someone's looking at counteroffers, if someone's having conversations with recruiters, it's because they're not feeling satisfied in their job. And that's the real conversation you have to have and you have to fix. Money doesn't fix anything. And it doesn't, if it fixes it for a very short term. Because the thing is, no matter how much you're paid, it never feels like enough. It doesn't. And I've, I don't care if my first job I was earning whatever, probably nothing, I don't know, £19,000 a year. It didn't feel like enough. Well, I'm making 10 times that now, and probably it still doesn't feel like enough. Because you spend up to the limit of what you earn. And
you get used to a certain lifestyle.
Exactly.
On a last point on the ultimatum counteroffer point. How does coming with a counteroffer might influence that employee's chance to progress within the organization in later rounds? Does that put them at risk?
Wow. See, I don't think it should. But again, it depends on how the conversation is handled. I mean, it depends if I'm giving advice here to the manager or to the employee. I mean, my advice to the employee is never have a confrontational conversation like that. What you do is you have a conversation and you frame it in a way which is saying, listen, you know what? I have had an amazing offer, and here's what's important to me. Here's why I'm considering it, because this is what's important to me. My first choice would be to meet this goal in this company. I love working for you guys. And I've had these exact negotiations where someone has come to me and they said, listen, I'm really excited about this because what they're saying to me is if I go into this job, I'm going to have the opportunity to manage a team. And you're not giving me that opportunity here. Does it exist here? Do you see a future for me here where I could ever be managing a team? And if I can say to them, yeah, I see that. In order to do that here, I'm going to need to see the following things from you happen. Like this is going to have to happen and this is going to have to happen. You're going to need to learn this. How could we get you to learn this? Well, we could get you to learn that if we moved you over to this project here, because you'd have the opportunity to learn that. And then I could see within 6 to 8 months, you progressing into a situation where we could give you a couple people underneath you. You could start to practice. We could put you on the whatever leadership track, development program. Then you'll have an emerging leader. You talk to them and then they say, okay, great. Now I feel like I can make my choice, rather than feeling like you go in with an either or. So don't make the other person defensive when you're negotiating, but help them understand what it is that you're looking for. And money might be part of that. So you might say, and I'm under all this pressure, at home, here's what I need. What would I need to do to deliver more value to you? Like, if I'm currently on 30 and I want to be earning 40, what do I need to give you in the business in order for you to reward that with 40? What does that look like for you? Then Sorry, that would be my advice. And then for the manager, my advice for the manager is to say, don't try and solve the problem with money. Right? Try and solve the problem through another route. And I've done that, and I've had people stay and be happy and had great careers in the company. So it's not about having a conversation, it's about how confrontationally you have it. Right? Nobody wants to work with someone who gets up their nose.
It's like what you're describing, this is not news, no. But having the right words to say that, to understand that it's not an either or situation, that it could be non-confrontational. It's the language that is missing. It's not the motivation, it's not the intent, it's sometimes the language and the understanding that there is an alternative route. And you said confrontational. I've been in situations where I've been confrontational in these identical scenarios. Thinking back about it, it's because I didn't have the language, and it's because of insecurities.
Yeah. But people don't always know what they want either. So the mistake, I think, maybe it's a self-awareness question, because people don't always know what they want. And sometimes if you say to people, what's really important to you in terms of your career, they may not have an immediate answer for that. So in that case, solving that problem then sometimes becomes a longer, deeper conversation to say, okay, well, let's have a really good conversation about your career and what's important to you, and then you get to a really interesting place with that person, and you take them on a kind of coaching conversation journey where you're really exploring what are the sorts of different things that can make them happy. And a really good example of that is sometimes, just the kind of role that I'm in with architecture, the architects will feel like, unless I become a project leader, I'm never going to earn enough money. Therefore, I must become a project leader, even though that's not really what I want to do. And so sometimes you have to have a deeper conversation to say to someone, actually, what you're super passionate about is not leading other people. What you're super passionate about is this other specialism. Well, great. Let's see how you develop. Let's give you that other career path and see how you can develop down that career path. And I know lots of people that have taken a job simply because it's more money. And then they've gotten into the job and they haven't stayed in that job because it's not fulfilling.
Yeah, you didn't tick the rest of the boxes.
You didn't think carefully enough about what you were going to get out of doing that job.
And some of it you can think, as long as hard as you want, but there are so many things that you cannot assess and pre-qualify before joining a company.
Yeah. And how do you do that? Really, the best way to do that is to talk to other people who work there. So as much as you can network and try and meet people before you make a decision is a good decision. But I think people should never be afraid of negotiating salary. They shouldn't be scared to talk about pay, but you need to do it in a way that is understanding of what the other person's position is. So you don't hold someone hostage in that conversation. You don't walk in the door and put a gun to their head. You walk in the door and you say, listen, here's a problem I'm trying to solve. Help me solve it.
So self-awareness in the workplace is huge because, of course, people are invested in their work. They sometimes overestimate their contribution and their importance. They sometimes underestimate. So part of self-awareness is also the easy part of benchmarking. How much is a person with my experience in similar roles and similar type of companies make?
Yeah.
You're better informed. You understand the age bracket. There's plenty of resources to kind of get at benchmarks for that. Fine. But what are some tips you can give people who want to have more or increase their self-awareness within work on the more subtle, abstract aspects?
Well, I think self-awareness is about being brave enough to ask other people for feedback. And I mean, we'll talk about the book list, and you've probably read this book, but Carol Dweck has done a lot of work on this with growth mindset. And a lot of companies are incorporating the growth mindset into their processes and their leadership training now, which is amazing. Microsoft is totally on that bandwagon. You can read about what they're doing in Harvard Business Review. But I think there is this idea of asking for feedback. So when you've done something, taking it to your trusted confidants, whoever your colleagues are that you trust their opinion, and especially if you've got a couple that are the kind of people that always complain about everything, they're really good to ask for feedback because they'll
know.
They kind of see themselves as troublemakers, so they love to poke you with a stick. So find out who those people are who will poke you with a stick and ask them for feedback, because we all have our blind spots. Finding out what those blind spots are, and also using reflection tools. So you want to understand, how did I do? There's a certain amount of self-reflection that can be really useful in doing that. So you just had a conversation with someone. After the conversation, you think, well, what percentage was that me talking or me listening? Did I really, when I was listening to them, was I thinking about something else, or was I really concentrating on what they were saying?
How much of that conversation I can repeat?
Yeah, exactly. But you can reflect afterwards and say, okay, actually, maybe I'm talking too much, or maybe I'm not talking enough. So using a self-reflection process is a good way to do it. And asking other people for feedback is the classic way to do it.
Esther Perel, the couples therapist, the business coach, psychologist, she break the conversation into short sentences that the other side can repeat, and start by seeing that they can repeat. So 2-3 sentences max, and then ask that person, what did you hear me say?
Yeah, that can be a huge learning tool for self-awareness. And you would be amazed. I mean, I'm always amazed with this. I mean, often I'm in a conversation with someone and I'll be like, okay, this is what I think I heard you say. And I'll repeat it back to them and they'll be like, no, that's not what I meant to tell you. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting, because that is actually what you said. And they're like, yeah, well, I shouldn't have said it like that. That's not what I was trying to say.
Wow.
and the other person, it's learning for them as well to be, actually, it's really hard to tell someone what you think accurately. And often we're in multicultural workplaces now too. I don't know what your last workplace is like. My current workplace, we've probably got 10 or 15 different languages on the go in our staff group. Wow. So, expecting people to be able to express themselves really well in a language that isn't even their first language, and maybe they've only lived in London for 6 months, so they're still really learning English, it complicates it even further.
And add to that the lack of context, because so much of the communication that is captured in a face-to-face interaction, body language, tone, is being completely made obsolete through digital communication.
Yeah, you're getting it on WhatsApp, you're getting it on chat, you're in group chat, you're not you really sure what someone's saying. And mostly I tell people, do not put it in an email. Just don't do it. If you've got feedback about someone, what happened in that meeting, I'm a little bit upset about it, do not put it in an email. It's the worst way. Email is good for follow-up. It is not good for initiation.
Yeah. It's not good for initiation. That's a very, very good point. Personal story, I was working for LinkedIn at the time. The company ran a big marketing initiative. It was out of my scope, but I supported it, spent hours on that, and the outcome of that initiative wasn't to my liking. My customers didn't win. I was very disappointed about how the company went about it and the marketing team, and they left me all the dirty work of letting the unsuccessful applicants that they haven't made it. very angry. I've written an email to the marketing team and I read it and I'm like, ooh, that's a bit harsh. I'm going to take 24 hours to think about that. I came back, I added some pleasantries, I reversed the order, I toned it down and I sent it and I didn't hear back for a week. And I'm like, okay, let's show them. A week later, I'm sitting down with my manager in a one-to-one and we're just about to wrap up. We're like 2 minutes to the end and I'm about to like close my notebook and head out. And she's like, oh, Tal, one last thing. I'm like, yeah. She goes, about that email to the marketing team. I'm like, what email? About the marketing initiative? I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, it made one person there cry. And I'm like, immediately my heart sank because I realized I've completely lost it there. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, they shouldn't have cried because I was right. Yeah. I mean, clearly they were in the wrong in that situation. She goes, listen, I don't know what to tell you about that, but it got to me from my director, who got it from their director, who got it from that team's manager, who got it from that person who received that email. So this email had been read by a few people and you need to figure out how to fix that. And I didn't feel like I need to fix it. I felt like I was, my rightness should be acknowledged. I leave that room and I can see that director, our director, across the room. It's an open space, and our eyes just kind of like locked. And someone grabbed me for a chat, and I'm like, I think I messed up. I need to go see the director. And I go over to him, and he's just standing there. I'm walking towards him. He's standing put, and I can see a hint of a smile on his face. And I'm like, ooh, why is this? Like, what's going on? And I approach him, and I'm like, I fucked up, didn't I? And he goes, yes, let's have lunch. Yeah. And he takes me down and he sits me down and he's like, what was that about? That's not you. That's not us. You know, I'm like, well, listen, I was right because I was still convinced I was right. He goes, it doesn't matter that you were right. You know, it's not, you don't change another person's opinion with an email. I don't know many people who can write that feedback in an email and get it right. He coached me through the whole situation, and with the one guarantee that I'll never write another email like that to a colleague again. It wasn't violent. It was just inconsiderate and not empathic. And what he said is, which really struck me, was think about that person and when they might be reading that. When you sent it, they just wrapped up another initiative. It was 11 p.m. That person hadn't slept in God knows how long. Everyone else is saying everything went fine, but they're stressed out of their minds because it's a highly visible project, and all of a sudden comes this guy who they know hardly anything about and gives out to them. I mean, you just tip that person over. And I didn't think that through. I didn't think that through.
Email's too easy. That's the part of the problem, right? And I think you can write those emails, but you have to delete them afterwards, right? You're not allowed to send them. Sometimes you need to write it to process your own emotion, right? So don't say to yourself, I'm not allowed to write them, but do say to yourself, I'm never allowed to send them. Write and delete.
Wow.
And learning to write and delete is a really powerful self-management tool. Right? Because you need to get it out. You have to. This is emotional management, right? You need to get it out, write it, and then delete it. Just never, ever, ever send it. But do find a way to talk about it. So this isn't to say, and again, in terms of resources, I'm trying to put in as many as I can, read the Kim Scott stuff on radical candor. She's got a really good website. She's got an amazing book. She's got a good TED Talk. And she talks about the idea of candor in work relationships, which is telling people when things aren't going right, giving them the feedback that they need, but doing it in a way that is compassionate and that doesn't break them down, but that actually builds them up. And there is a skill to it, but there's resources like, her book and other resources out there that can help you do it. There's another really good book written by the guys from the Harvard Business Negotiation Project called Thanks for the Feedback. Which is, again, fantastic resource for this sort of conversation. And it's a skill you need to learn. And every person, no matter what kind of company you're learning in, understanding that skill of how to give really good feedback is an important skill to learn. And I think we should teach it in schools. We should certainly teach it in business, and everyone should learn how to do that. And I've had colleagues who send me emails like the one you were discussing. I've received lots of them. And I have a really simple way of dealing with them. I delete them. And then a week later, when that person says to me, Amy, did you read my email? I say, no, I now automatically delete all your emails. I haven't read one in weeks. So I'm really happy if you want to talk to me about something, I'll sit down and talk it through with you. But yeah, no, I stopped reading your emails weeks ago. They'll be like, well, you're not allowed to do that. And I'm like, oh, you're not, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm allowed to do it. And that's, self-protection, right? And I don't get anything but stress from those emails. I don't find them helpful. I don't find them useful. I don't think they're a good problem solving tool, but yeah, really happy to sit down with you and talk through what the problems are. And then that changes the whole relationship because they realize actually that it's not a bat and ball relationship. They can't just pick you up and whack you across the office. I'm not your tennis ball. I'm an equal to you. We're an adult relationship, and happy to talk it through. But I'm not happy to receive those emails. I just delete them. Solves the problem. And the problem with email is it sits in your email box, and when it's a nasty email, you can go back and reread it over and over again. So it doesn't just wind you up once. It winds you up 20 times. Even if you just see the subject line sitting in your email box and you just look at it and then emotionally you have a reaction to it.
Yeah, it's a trigger.
Yeah. So there's a really good way to deal with colleagues who send emails like that. And that's my method for doing it. Wow. I just put them on, I say to them at some point, if you can learn how to write a good email, I'll start reading them again. But otherwise, no, that avenue is not available to you.
That's innovative.
Yeah. And those actually were good work relationships for me. For me, it worked because it gave me a forum to be able to talk to people about their behavior.
And you know what? You gave people who accept that, they gave them a chance to save face. Because if I go back to some emails I've written, I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah.
When you're out of the loop, when you have a better perspective and you take things in proportions, and you go back and you're like, ooh, that should not have been highlighted in bold.
Yeah.
This should not have been written in caps.
I was talking to a friend of mine who gets emails from people in her company that in the subject line, last Thursday's meeting, bracket, very upset, and bracket, you're like, who sends emails? Like, I would just be like, right to the trash. If I was to do. I'm like, I'm not. And just saying, if you want to grab my attention, that is not a great way to do it.
Wow.
Really happy. But I think we need to be honest with each other. We need to call each other out on that behavior. And I think it's if you want to be part of a good team, and wherever you work in a little village, you work in a community. And work is a village. You have to work together. You have to sit next to each other. You have to spend 70 hours, 80 hours a week together if you're in a startup. You need to find a way to have those negotiations. And you can't treat each other badly. You need to have good boundaries. You have to imagine, you're on a first date with that person. You're trying to impress them.
Yeah. And they'll be here tomorrow and next month.
Yeah.
Like it just the sense of winning in an argument is I think in work it's hardly, like, it doesn't happen. You can have your feature better prioritized, but you can't win too much when it comes to coexistence in a workplace.
Yeah, no, I agree, because it only works short term. So that kind of negotiation, if you want to have a hard-nosed negotiation with someone, do it in a relationship that doesn't have longevity. So if it's someone you're going to see once, fine. Be really hard-nosed with them, you'll win your negotiation. If it's someone that you need to see every day for the next 6 months, don't use that technique because it will destroy the relationship.
We talked about that in other episodes about when looking for a job, then it's not just the outcome. Did you get the salary you wanted or not? It's about also how did you get that?
Yeah, because you're setting the tone right from the beginning.
Yeah. So fine, you've proved the point. They're willing to pay you that sum of money, but will they enjoy now sitting shoulder to shoulder with a person who negotiated that salary and how you did that?
You have to get off on the right foot. I think that's really important.
This morning, I read about the company Brandless. It's a company that started in 2012, I think, and they started with really good, clean, well-produced beauty care products, and the brand was called Brandless, so it was like super minimalistic and nice, and then super cheap as well. I think $3, like breaking the market completely. And then they expanded into other homeware things, and now they've gone bust. And this is a company who raised nearly $300 million.
Wow.
And At some point, they realize the business model doesn't work. And instead of trying to make it last, pivot, change, raise more money, debt, they're like, they closed it down and made sure they have enough money to pay their vendors and pay severance to their employees and so on. So, in a very atypical move for a company with this hunger and this growth, they've done the counterintuitive thing, which is not take it all the way. I don't know the full story, so there might have been sides to it that are less glamorous, of course. But I think that gets us to the point of understanding that relationship is one thing, but they also fall apart. Sometimes they fall apart because the company went bust, and sometimes they fall apart because of performance or because of politics. I want to spend a little bit of time speaking about that, because that aspect of the innovation ecosystem, people who are not HR experts and don't have access to HR resources, but they do have to make serious decisions with long-lasting, dire implications on the lives of the people they work with. Firing someone. So let's unpack that. 15 years in HR roles, you've had to fire a few people.
Don't ask me to tell you how many people.
I was about to ask.
It's an embarrassing number.
I was about to ask, and I'm like, you know what? Maybe not.
I've been through many rounds of redundancies in different jobs for different reasons. And so those are always big chunky ones. You might have a redundancy run of 30 people at a time or 60 people at a time. So the numbers can add up quite quickly. I think, and you and I have discussed this before, with how to have a good exit with someone. Because I think in an organization, the whole team watches when somebody leaves. So it's a natural part of business life that people come and go. Right? So the first thing is to understand, everyone on the team understands it's not unusual for someone to go. Sometimes they don't go voluntarily, and that can be a good thing. But the whole team is watching. So you need to ensure that the way that you do the exit is really respectful, because everyone will be wondering, what if that ever happens to me? How will it be handled? And if they don't respect someone at that really critical moment in their life, then they're not going to be compassionate with me when other things go wrong. There's some really good writing out there at the moment about compassion in business and talking about having a workplace which is more loving and more compassionate. Really challenging to talk about loving in terms of management of business. We don't usually do that. We think, that's our personal life, that's not business. But I think when you're exiting someone from the business, which is good HR speak, we don't say firing now, we say exiting. When someone's leaving involuntarily, doing it in a way which shows them respect and has a lot of compassion, costs you nothing and helps the whole team have less guilt about what happened. Because you won't, the whole team will feel guilty when someone leaves.
It's not only that it costs you nothing, it saves you a whole lot.
It can. Yeah.
But I think everyone understands that. Everyone understands that an employee that had a bad experience is a bad ambassador for the brand, for the company. But it's not as easy. What gets in the way of a healthy separation like that?
I think taking things personally, and we mentioned that before, but I think trying to help someone exit in a way that they're not taking it overly personally and you're not taking it over personally as a manager is really important. So giving them an opportunity to understand why they're leaving. And people get angry when they don't understand why they're leaving. They feel like no one's talked to me. Why haven't you ever mentioned this before? So ensuring that you have enough informal pre-dialogue so that no one should ever be surprised that they're being exited from a company, unless sometimes you're in a redundancy situation where that can't be done. But if it's just a situation about performance, no one should be surprised. So not everyone is very self-aware. Sometimes you have performance conversations with people and they think, well, yeah, you talked to me about it, but I didn't realize how serious it was. So having performance conversations that gently escalate so that people understand, listen, we need to have a really serious conversation. And then they don't have to agree with you necessarily. They can disagree. They can say, well, my opinion of how I did on this was X. Your opinion is Y. And that's okay. You don't have to force them to agree with you, but you can just say, in this situation, I'm really sorry. I don't see X, I see Y. I was in a situation with someone once who was in a role where they were providing an internal service to the company. They were in an IT support help desk role. Their opinion of how well they were serving their colleagues was quite high. The feedback from the colleagues was quite poor. So in those situations, you share that feedback with them, in a way to sort of say, listen, here's what people expect and here's what they're getting. There's a gap, right? You give them the opportunity to close that gap. It doesn't happen. Then when you're having the exit conversation, you can say, that person says, I believe I've fulfilled it. And you say, well, I don't believe you have, and here's why. They need to understand why you hold the opinion you hold, even if they disagree with you. I think sometimes people make the mistake of feeling like you have to have agreement. You don't. You just have to have clarity. And the clarity, I think, is the essence of a good conversation like that. They just need to understand why you hold the opinion you hold, even if they disagree with the opinion. And trying to force the other person to agree with you, I think, can be unnecessarily painful. So giving them clarity, really making sure that they're not being let go for an unfair reason. You're only doing this because I complained about my manager last month. You're only doing this because I said I was planning on having a baby in 6 months. And this is, discrimination. Or you're only doing it because I'm the only person on the team who's Spanish and they're all French and the French people don't like me and it's just about me being Spanish.
Yeah.
So, you need to have that conversation. They need to understand that they're not being let go for an unfair reason. And as a manager, you need to make sure you're not consciously or unconsciously letting them go for an unfair reason, because that's not good practice. But they need to understand, listen, there's a gap. Here's where my gap is. Here's why I'm not interested in investing any more time and energy with you closing that gap. And you just have to be honest and say that, listen, yes, absolutely. If we threw another 6 months at this or another 8 months at it, we might be able to close the gap, but I'm not willing to make that investment. That's a business choice I'm making, and it's not about you as a person. You've got lots of friends here. I really respect and give them what you respect about them as a person, but say, this gap, as a business person, I'm not willing to invest in closing that gap anymore. So I think it is giving them that clarity, giving them that opportunity to be heard. The worst thing, I think, is sometimes shutting people down. They might need to talk at you for 20 minutes and you just need to sit there and be quiet and let them talk at you for 20 minutes. And again, that's about being respectful.
It could be the only time they got to do that.
Yeah. And they may say all sorts of things that are hurtful about you or hurtful about other people in the company because they're angry. But you know what? So what? They're angry. Let them have their moment. Don't respond to everything they're saying. Just let them have their moment.
If you're the person who's having to let someone go, then you don't have to win that argument eventually. No. You don't have to be right for one last time. You don't have to find that agreement. You've already made the decision. Yeah. At least give them the feeling that they have been heard.
Exactly. And that's really important. I think it so often, those situations can go wrong when the manager is trying desperately to win the argument. And you don't have to win the argument. You're the person with all the power.
Wow.
You don't have to hammer it home to them. They just have to feel fairly heard. They need to understand the fair reason that they're leaving. That they need the opportunity to say their piece. And then they need to know what's going to happen. You need to give them a story. And, we talked about this before. They're going to have to walk out of that room and they're going to have to go home, maybe tell their wife, you know what? I don't know how we're going to pay the mortgage next month because I've just been fired. Or they're going to have to go to the pub with their friend after work and say, you know what? I'm not working here anymore. All my friends work in this company. I don't have any friends outside of this company. They're going to have to go to the pub and they're going to tell all of their friends that, guess what? I'm not going to be showing up at work on Monday. And you're all my friends. You're my entire social network. So taking some time in that meeting to say, okay, what's the message going to be? What are we going to tell people? What do you want to tell the team about this process for how you're leaving and why you're leaving? And agree the story with them. Let them think about it. Maybe they need to go away and think about it and come back to you. But help them frame the story that they're going to tell so that when they leave and they talk to people, they've got a positive story. They've got a way to frame it. I mean, that might sound really trite, like what's the positive story? I've just been fired. But there's always a way to frame it. It can be, you know what? I came into this job thinking that I was going to have the opportunity to, sell into the international market. I was really excited. I was going to go to Germany. And then I realized, actually, you know what? I don't like traveling and I don't really like the selling conversation. I'd much rather be in an account management follow-up role. And, it wasn't for me. what is it that what's that story, so that they can frame it in a way that isn't I failed, but actually I made the wrong choice and now I'm going to pivot and make a better choice.
Finding the story is a solution.
Yeah.
Let's stay 1 second on the problem, because the letting someone go is a lengthy process at times. It takes a lot of attention, and when you're optimizing your resources as a founder, as an executive, it might not always feel like the best use of your time, because the hard part was making the decision, and the decision had been made, so let's just get it over and done with.
Yeah.
So let's spend 1 or 2 more minutes on explaining what happens when that story is not being agreed upon.
You mean when where there's two different versions of the exit?
Yeah, someone has been let go for very good reasons. Performance didn't meet the certain KPIs, even though they've been managed, and there was a performance improvement plan for 3 to 6 months. But there was some sort of failure to communicate. That person doesn't agree with the story, and they leave that tiny room in the corner of the office, and they go back and have to pick up their stuff and leave. What do they say? And they don't know, because they just heard you've been fired because you're not good.
Yeah. Well, I think that's, I guess what I'm trying to say is change the dialogue, right? Because the dialogue, that should never be personal. It should never be you're being fired because you're not good. The dialogue should always be the skills that you're bringing to this job aren't the right skills for success in this job. Someone always has skills. They always have something they can bring in, but they may not be what that job needs at that particular time. And what they need to understand is that there's a gap about their skills, but it's not about who they are in the world. It's not about who they are as a person. And as a manager, that should never be the narrative that you're giving someone else, because that's just unnecessarily cruel. You're not there to personally attack someone, and that's not your job. And you don't need to do that in order to fire them, because the only good reason to fire someone is when there's a gap. And it might be that there's misconduct. So, in a misconduct situation, someone has misbehaved, you can even frame it that way, which is to say, listen, we all have different codes of conduct in our head, right? In your head, for whatever reason, you felt that it was appropriate to make a sexual advance on this person on your team. And you know what? We have a really bright line about that. Here, we don't consider that acceptable conduct. You knew that, you understood it, you've crossed the line. That's just because you have a different value set than we have. Our value sets aren't matching, right? We don't want that to happen here. You don't have to say, and on top of that, you're a creep. Or you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to make it into a personal insult, right? You can try and keep it as objective as you can. As a manager, you need to make sure that you're not having an unnecessarily emotional engagement with the person when you're exiting them. You need to keep it super objective. You need to keep it super professional. You have to avoid the temptation to make it personal, because making it personal is really easy. We're brought up doing that. We're all brought up in families with the throwaway remark and the judgmental remark. But, you're not in your family. You're in a work environment, so you need to try and make sure it's not personal.
Startups can be highly emotional work environments, a lot of passion, a lot of pressure. How can we mitigate that?
Well, in a general sense, I think we do need to give each other a certain amount of space, right? So in a work environment where everyone's pressurized, we need to recognize that sometimes stress behavior will come out. And when we recognize stress behavior in another person, we need to give them a little bit of space and think, okay, that's their stress talking, not them talking. And give each other a little bit of rope in a way, I think that's really important. And then also we need to teach people coping mechanisms. So what to do when you can see that someone isn't coping, and really help people figure out what those different coping mechanisms are. So if you're in a meeting and you're feeling like the only option you have is to yell, then you need to teach yourself to how to be quiet and not give in to that temptation, to yell. If you're a yeller, some people are like that, so that's teaching them those coping strategies, what they need to do is really important.
A big part of what we see on the show and outside is that risk-taking is often a byproduct of a person's safety net. A safety net could be their bank accounts, could be their family, their spouse, their self-confidence. But I think that as an employer that has to let someone go, you can also provide some sort of a safety net, even if you're 100% right about dismissing that person.
Yeah.
What can an employer do in order to better support an employee that had been let go?
Yeah. So I think there's classic things like saying, agreeing or giving them some assurance of what will happen when you reference, right? So again, referencing, you have to be careful. You can't say anything that's misleading legally. That could get you into trouble, but that doesn't mean there's nothing you can say, right? And again, there's usually something you can say about someone which is constructive. And what you can do is give them that and say, you know what, listen, at a certain point, someone's going to reference you. And here's what I'm prepared to say in the reference, which will be supportive. And here's what I'm prepared to say if I'm asked directly about what worked and what didn't work. And you can find a way to do that. That's really constructive. I've been in situations where I've referenced someone who didn't, for example, survive at a job. And I've said to the referee really clearly, who's going to manage this person? And the referee has said, well, you know what, I'm managing them. And I said, okay, great. If you want them to be successful, here are some things that this person needs to work on that will help them be successful. You could be aware of when you're managing them. So there's ways you can be constructive in the reference, which isn't saying to the other person, don't hire them, because not your job to say that. You don't know. They could be successful in another context, but help the new manager understand what are the things that you observe that would help the other person be successful. So agree the reference. Like I said, as much as you can, try and agree the message and the story that's going to go out there for their colleagues and the team to help them save face. I think that's really important. You can also think about what are they going to be able to use that's from the job. So, I mean, in the creative industries, there's often portfolio issues. So what work can I show that I did here? Some work might be confidential. You've signed an NDA, you're not allowed to show it. So agreeing with them to say, okay, when you're presenting in your next interview,
important.
What work are you allowed to show? And trying to give them enough that they can show something and help them think that they're walking away from this work experience having learned something. So framing it for them, they say, listen, even though this didn't work out for you, you got this from it. You got that from it. And maybe it wasn't right for you to be in a selling role, but look at everything you learned about client relationships.
Yeah.
So if you do want to go into an account management role, you'll take that forward. And here's how you could do it.
A simple tip on that would be if someone is going through an escalation process on their way potentially out of a business, it starts being heavily documented. There's more weekly reports, there's more follow-ups. I would go back to those and start picking out those things that have happened.
Yeah.
They may not have happened in a way that satisfy the KPIs or the business objectives, but they have happened at a certain degree.
Yeah.
So you can start using that, and it helps you detach yourself from that situation of I'm letting someone go, I'm right in doing so. This person had slowed the business, they had not delivered on what was required of them, and so on. Find objectively the things that have happened.
Yeah, and you can prep for it. There's a really good book, we'll put it on the reading list, which is called The Setup to Fail Syndrome. And it actually started out as a Harvard Business Review article. A lot of good books do. They published this article. It was so popular on HBR that they then decided to write a whole book on it.
Wow.
And a lot of what they talk about in this book is written for managers. It's about how to have these kind of conversations, which are performance management conversations pre-exit, but what the mindset and how mindset influences you as a manager. And there are a lot of very well-studied, well-researched cognitive biases around what happens once you decide someone isn't performing. All you notice what they do reinforces that bias. It's called confirmation bias. It's very well studied. It's very interesting. And it's like, as a manager, are you falling into the trap of confirmation bias? Have you simply decided that person isn't performing and now you're looking for reasons to support that? And I would encourage anyone who's managing people to read this book. I think it's very powerful. It has a lot of learning in there for how to manage the performance conversation. That's really useful.
Mm-hmm. Another tip you gave me is an organization should have an alumni group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the alumni group's a great idea. And it's really good for recruitment, because people will refer to you. If you exit people well, they'll still refer people back to you for hiring. But also, again, it's that whole survivor guilt thing with the rest of the team. Whereas if they can see that people stay friends of the family, they stay part of the family, then they'll feel better treated. It's an interesting. They'll feel less guilty about their friend leaving the company.
It's a better aftertaste. Yeah. And the other thing you said is a respectable farewell, like physical, tangible closure.
Yeah, these kind of rituals are really important. And it's funny, if you read the classic change management books, like the John Kotter books, he'll talk a lot about change management, how you need to bookend a change process with an opening celebration and a grieving celebration for whatever it is you're losing that's changing. And even though that sounds very like HR speak, it actually makes a really big difference for people to have that sense of closure. Go for drinks with the team, have a card, have a gift, even if you have to do it off-site a week later. If they're not comfortable coming back in the office, that's fine. But do it. It's really important for everybody.
It's huge because sometimes you don't know what the other people know.
Yeah.
And you carry your narrative and your hurt, but you're also carrying what other people might be thinking. So being in a room with your colleagues and peers and hearing someone say something, you're like, okay, at least we're in alignment about that.
Yeah.
And it also saves you having 40 different conversations. Which is super painful. So even if the circumstances seem dire and it's not the happy farewell you'd have wanted it to be, as an employer, you'll be doing a huge service to everyone by finding a way to wrap up things. You don't have to be individually responsible for producing that thing. Delegate it, fine, but provide that person who's leaving the company this type of opportunity.
Well, ideally, their good friend should organize it. I mean, most people have at least one good friend at work, and you should say to that person, "Listen, here's a budget, whatever. Here's £50. Get a present, get some drinks together. Let's organize it." And remind people when they're leaving that those networks that they make, the people that they've met working in this company, will be networks that they can use the rest of their life. And those professional networks will help you get your next job. They might help you get your job that's 2 or 3 jobs down the line. They might be the people on the end of the phone that you could call for advice when you really need it. So they need an opportunity to keep all those networks going. So that exit process, when they're feeling like, oh, I don't think I want to go for drinks, you're saying, listen, it's really important. It's important for you. It'll help you in your next stage.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Let's talk about the helping them in their next stage, because when you're the employer and you have all the power and you've made a decision and you're unhappy with time has been wasted, your money has been wasted. The person who's really struggling is definitely not you. No. What can an employee who's losing their job for whatever reason do in order to A, exit better, B, better set up for the next job, and 3, recover wholesomely as a person?
I think it's, again, doing a reflection process and asking for feedback. So saying to the people that you worked with, taking a moment to think, what did I learn from this job? What were my accomplishments? Even just so you can add them to your CV. Everyone doing a CV now, you don't just list what you did, you list what you accomplished. So having a process where you think, actually, I did this. And, I mentioned Dan Pink earlier. He's got I think a website tool they've set up that's called I Did This for exactly this reason. To like once a week go in and make a log of just an Excel sheet. What did I do? What were my accomplishments this week? Just as a way for gratitude of acknowledging for yourself, hey, I'm making progress, I'm doing stuff. So I think when you leave, do that. Make yourself your I did this list. Say to your colleagues, I'm trying to prepare for my next round of interviews. What are the stories you think I should tell? What were the moments? What were the real highlights of when we worked together? Because you need those stories to come to life when you're in your next interview. And ask people for that feedback. Don't be scared. Don't feel like that's a really egotistical thing to do. People want to help you, and allow other people to be generous with you. They want to do that. That's a gift that they're going to feel better having given you. So you're at a moment where you're being vulnerable. It's okay. Let yourself be a little bit vulnerable. Ask people for that feedback and then use that to create your positive stories. The stories you tell yourself are the most powerful ones, and those are the stories that are going to get you your next job. Because when someone says to you, what is it that you love about what you do? If you're feeling negative about your job and you can't come up with anything, you need to really reframe that narrative. You need to say, God, there's a reason why what was the reason I took this job to begin with? And you gotta go back and you think, God, I took this job actually because I'm really passionate about this industry or this product that they're trying to make, and I think about, I was telling you this story earlier, one of the reasons I work in architecture for HR was when I was 12 and dreaming about building my own house, right? I have that passion inside of me. So even if I get to the point where I'm kind of done with this job, I haven't lost that passion for building. That's still inside of me. So figure out what your positive frames are and write those stories down. Ask for feedback from your friends. Ask them to help you do mock interviews. That's a really nice thing that ex-colleagues could do with you as well. And say, take a look at my CV for me. What's missing off there? What else could I add in there? What other skills do you think I'm missing? Get feedback. People will give you feedback on your CV. Practice questions with them. Practice interviews with them. Those can be really powerful. People will give you that feedback. Are you telling the right stories?
Another confidence building exercise you can do while exiting that solves for you and also solves for the company. Startups, fast moving organizations have a lot of information retention issues, documenting, saving it. If you can create a robust, detailed handover document, A, you're building your portfolio as you're doing it. B, you're probably demonstrating to your higher ups the length of work you've done for them, which they're probably not aware of. And C, you're setting up the next person for that role. So I think that's super, super huge and so hard to do. You feel everything that company represents could be like trigger some sort of a response, and you don't take it, do it offline, do it in a cafe, find the time, put it into a document, share the document with the people who's involved in your work, tell them why it's there, give them the opportunity to review that document with you, add stuff to it, and more often than not, they'll be surprised. Oh, wow, I didn't know you did that. Thank you so much for putting that out, because otherwise we would have forgotten.
The other thing is you can use that to negotiate some extra notice period. I would say, if they're saying to you, oh, we want you to leave on Monday, you can say, actually, a really powerful thing I could do for you is document X, Y, and Z that I did, or these client relationships, or, whatever it is you held. You say, listen, why don't you put me on gardening leave me at home for 2 weeks. That's how long it's going to take me to do this. At the end of it, I will produce X document for you. So it could also, in those leaving moments, you really want to be trying to get as much cash as you can, because you're trying to secure yourself before your next job. So negotiating that, even if you do it off-site, can be a really great way to try and get a couple extra weeks pay as well, which I think is worth thinking about.
Excellent. So we've covered a lot of what HR is doing, and a few things I wanna ask you. One is, when you meet HR, if you're an employee and you meet HR, something had already transpired. It's very late in the process. Do you think HR should be involved in escalations earlier, in conflict resolution within work?
Oh yeah, I mean, a big part of what a really good HR function will do for any company is what I talked about earlier with talent development. So actually, really good HR people are in there having talent conversations all the time, right? From knowing people's career. If the only time you're meeting your HR department is when you're about to be fired, that's a pretty bad sign about your HR department. That's not what a good HR team is there to do, right? So you should be having talent conversations with people all the way along. You should understand what their challenges are. You should be helping, the coaching process with their manager. You're not their manager as an HR person, right? But you're there to help empower the manager, make sure those conversations are happening. People come to me all the time to ask for advice. I don't know how to have this conversation with my manager. How should I be doing it? And I give people lots of coaching, for how to handle those kind of difficult conversations with their managers. Also, lots of coaching conversations if their performance is going off track. So they might come to me and say, you know what, I've just had a really difficult conversation about my performance. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. How do I get more information? How do I deal with this? So I'll coach people a lot informally through that as well. And I think that's a really powerful thing that could be done.
I'd encourage anyone who's listening to reach out to the HR departments, do a sense check, be proactive, ask for the feedback before you need it. And if you hit a rough patch with a peer, a colleague, a manager, see if you can involve HR to help you resolve that. We mentioned the cultural differences, the communication styles that are clashing, the different priorities. And I found myself in a complicated situation. I had a manager, I was killing it at my job, but I didn't get along with my manager. So my objective winning counted for a lot less because my manager could not have given a good review on my performance because she was suffering by managing me because I was making her life very, very hard. But again, I was right. And and I couldn't get out of that loop. At one point she goes, listen, I'm going to bring an HR person into the room, and my heart started racing and I'm like, oh my God, she's getting back at me. This would be the end. I can't believe she's doing that to me. And she's like, she saw I was taken aback, and she's like, it's not going to be that type of a conversation. It's off the record. It doesn't go anywhere. But it's just for us to have a better, healthier conversation. We're going to have a third party. You say what you think, I say what I think. Let's get some tips on how we can work better together. A lifesaver. And a good HR person made me feel I was right, but also that there's a better way to work. So I would highly encourage people who have access to HR professionals to do that. What advice would you give those who don't have an HR person on site, or they don't have an HR person with that bandwidth or capacity to help in that way?
Well, I think you've got to get coaching advice from someone. So I think if you've got someone in your company that you trust, so another manager who's maybe not on the same team as you that you can go to for advice, find someone who you can problem solve with and practice the difficult conversation with. Get advice, have a sounding board, and there'll be someone else in the organization who's sufficiently senior that they have the perspective that you need. Sometimes asking someone at the same level of you is good, but sometimes you need someone who's maybe a bit more experienced, a bit more senior in the organization, who can explain to you the perspective of your manager. And go to that person, ask for a confidential conversation, and get coaching from them. There's lots of good TED Talks, there's lots of good books, there's lots of good resources online that you can go to how to have a difficult conversation. That stuff's all out there, but I think it's really powerful to find someone in your organization that you trust that you can go and talk to and have a good coaching conversation with.
But Amy, what if my senior people person is the CEO's right hand, and I don't feel safe that my matter will be handled the right way, that they'll be discreet about it, that they'll have my best interest in mind?
Well, then don't go to them. Really find someone else that you trust. There'll be someone either, or if it's not in your organization, then get advice from someone in your network. Ask your friends where they work. Do they have a good person that they could talk to? And I give informal coaching for people all the time, not just people that I work with, but people that are referred to me from other people. And I'm happy to do that. I'm sure there's other HR professionals out there that are the same. So, go to your network, but don't feel like you're on your own, because you're never on your own. And there's lots of people who are out there who are willing to help. But you do need to do that with a really open mind. So you need to be doing that to sort of say, what can I learn? And what am I not seeing about myself that I might be prepared to learn? I think that's really important.
Part of what the show is trying to do is to reduce the collateral damage of working in the innovation system, and I think that's great advice. That's great advice for that. You're not alone. You're not alone. People have experienced what you have experienced. You can find resources in books, in TED Talks, in other people, in other companies. Know that you are not alone. What you've experienced had been experienced before by other people who had positive outcomes from that situation. So reach out and do ask for help. I think it's the two final questions for me. One is about men in HR, men in people's operations. Are there any?
Well, HR used to be all men. With most business roles. Every VP of HR used to be male. Women used to do the admin and payroll. Fair. I think payroll was probably always women, and so for many years it was all men. And there are still lots of men involved in HR. I think because the traditional idea of HR is tea and sympathy. Can I? Quote unquote tea and sympathy. People feel like, oh well, women are better at that because they want to go have a cup of tea and you can cry with them and they understand tears and that's all good. Whereas what's sexy in HR right now is all data analytics. It's all about knowing your data. There's a really good book written by the guy that used to be head of people operations at Google, Laszlo Bock, which is worth reading, called Work Rules. And he writes a lot, all from the analytical perspective. And Google's, all about collecting data and analyzing it. So I'm sure his team is heavily male. They're all into their data collection. Women can do data analysis as well. It's a bit of a stereotype, but I think yes. So there's lots of room for both men and women in HR. I think you just have to go into it with the right intellectual attitude. Is that what I want to try and say? For HR, you have to go in there wanting to disrupt HR. Go in there wanting to do HR in a way that is really bringing value to the business. And I think if you're a guy and you're a guy with operational background or a woman with operational background, then HR could end up being a really good career choice for you. One of the best HR people I hired on my last team was someone who was originally trained as a designer and then went into retail and then ended up in HR. And she was fantastic because she understood what the design teams wanted. She didn't want to be a designer anymore. So you're looking for people with slightly unusual backgrounds can be a really good way into HR and can make you a really good HR person.
You mentioned disruption in HR, and disruption comes with friction, and friction can come with confrontation. And it could be that the HR professionals, the people operation professionals, are the human shields in a business when faced with complicated, difficult decisions. And that's heightened exposure to the hardest, nastiest parts of the business. Mm-hmm. How do you protect yourself? How do you heal and recover from these? What can people learn from how you've learned to cope?
You certainly need to be a pretty resilient person to go into this sort of role, especially the way that I do HR involves a lot of change management, and people are always very unsettled when change is happening. So you do need to have really good personal boundaries. I think that's really important. So you need to be able to separate work, keep work in its box. There's things that I do with that. I'm really clear. We were laughing about this earlier. I come home at night, 8:00 at night, my phone goes in the closet under the stairs. So I turn it off and I don't engage with any digital anything after 8:00 at night. I have, that's my rest time. That's my recovery time. I have a really good meditation app that I use on the train. I commute on the train back and forth into work. It's one of those binaural apps where you put different types of noise in both ears, and it's especially relaxing. I don't understand the science about it entirely, but it really works. And I do that 20 minutes on the way in the morning, and sometimes even longer than that on the way home at night. And I find that's made a really big difference, having that mindfulness practice. In the morning on the way in, I love to listen to podcasts, listen to new authors that have books coming out. And that gets me revved up and excited about work. So I go into work already feeling super optimistic. So having that optimistic attitude and going in there with some positive ideas in my head, I find gets me ready for the day. That helps a lot. Feeling super organized helps. So making time in my diary for planning, it's really important. And not letting yourself feeling overwhelmed. So making sure you're making time in a role like HR, that can be a very reactive role. Carving out, blocking out that time in your diary really assertively is important. Eating well, sleeping, so those classic pillars of health, right? Moving, I go for a walk every day at lunch. I am religious about it, at least 20 minutes. And again, I just usually put on my noise canceling headphones and walk. What works for you, I think, is really important, but you need to take it consciously and do it.
And the understanding that work is not just about the output while in the office or working from home. Work is also the kind of the periphery of the day. So taking the time to heal so you can come back tomorrow, rejuvenated. Taking the time to prepare and warm yourself up for the day. There is no way about that, and that is part of work. And if you want to be successful doing work for the long term, you need to figure out what are your protocols in doing that, and you need to stick to them. And having a huge workload is a poor justification to not getting ready to do more work the day after.
And there's always more work to do. I mean, I could stay at work 24/7 and never get all the work done. And I'm sure many people feel like that, especially in a startup situation, right? The work will never be finished, right? There's always more work to do. So it's up to you to put those really good boundaries around the work. So you're not good to anybody if you burn yourself out, and we've all learned those lessons. I've learned those lessons in jobs. I've burnt myself out in jobs. And you're no good to the team. You're no good to the company. You're no good to yourself once you've burnt yourself out. And the problem with burnout is the way it happens is so weird because you're on a high. I don't know, it's like the way people describe manic depression, right? You're on a high, you're flying, you're doing more than you've ever done in your life. You're like boom, 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 every day, HR Olympics. And then one day you're just dead. And you're sitting at your desk crying and you're like, what happened? There just, like with burnout, there's no gray, it feels like there's no gray zone. It's just you're flying and then you're grounded. So it can creep up on you. That's why I think it's really important to give yourself those care moments.
You wouldn't necessarily know when it's coming.
No, you don't see it. You're just flattened by it.
And you know what? Even people who have experienced burnout once won't necessarily see it coming for the second time. And the worst part of it is that the recovery is not a good night's sleep. Once this had happened, it's not just about, okay, I need a long weekend, I need a week off. No, something like you are depleted on a whole new level. You're motivationally, morally, emotionally depleted. It's not just, I'm tired.
No, it's deeper than that. And also it can really affect your self-confidence as well, burnout. Because what happens when you overwork, you will get to the point where you start to underperform, right? Because you won't be able to deliver. You've said yes to too many things. You've taken on too many things. And then once you start to doubt yourself of, oh my God, I haven't hit the deadlines I think I'm going to hit, then you can get into that. Your self-confidence goes, then your performance goes, then you doubt yourself, then your manager starts to doubt yourself. Then you're into that sort of set up to fail stuff I was talking about, where it just then becomes a snowball. And all of a sudden you're not doing what you used to be able to do.
And on top of that, it'll take you twice as long to produce half the output.
Exactly.
So the returns are diminishing on your work, and that's also hindering. And it's unfair that I'm trying to squeeze decades of experience into a 90-minute podcast. So I'd encourage anyone who's listening and has questions for us for episode 2, write them down, submit them, reach out to Amy. I'll give the details in a second, and reach out to Startup Nightmares. We'll cover these topics with Amy and other guests if need be, because this is a world of wealth, and the knowledge that you've shared with us could be transformative to people's lives, not only to the innovation ecosystem. Amy, any parting words you'd wanna leave our listeners with?
You kind of look at all your stories you've had of your life. And my last year that I had at the previous studio where I was at, we hired over 100 people in a 6-month period. And this is the kind of really intense experience that I think a lot of startups have. Right?
Over 100 people in a 6-month period.
Yeah. Yes.
How big was the company when this thing started happening?
So it's doubling. So I think we went from 135 people to almost 250 people in a very short period of time. And those are the kind of challenges when you're scaling up a business, right? That you have to approach. Like for us, it was like HR ninja work, right? How do we do this in a way that's not just hiring the only available people? Because this is a mistake that the company where I was working had done before, right? They were in a panic. They were panic hiring. They just, are you available? Can you start on Tuesday? Great, here's your chair. And then that leads you into all sorts of performance issues sort of 6 months down the line when you realize people can't actually do their jobs.
Future you hates past you.
Yes, exactly. So we went through this really interesting process where we said, okay, who are our people that are like top 5 designers? Who are the people that are really knocking it? Like the ones that you're like, if I could clone that one, I would clone that woman like 5 times over. And what is it that makes them so special and so good at what they're doing? And we came up with a list of qualities that said, these are the kind of things where people can survive in this environment. right? So in this environment, in order to survive, for example, you had to have a really high level of comfort with ambiguity, right? If you were the kind of person that could design but had to do it step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you were not going to survive and be happy in this environment. You had to be the kind of person that could just see around corners. You're happy walking through the fog. You don't know what's coming at you next. You're willing to redo it, change it 10 times, ride the roller coaster. Like, it's almost like saying to people, what's your favorite ride in the amusement park? If they said roller coaster, you're like, yeah, you can hire this one, because you need people who love the thrill, you know? And so we knew that. And then also people who had a really high level of curiosity. So people who are never satisfied, right? The kind of people who are always looking for the next thing, you know, what was that curiosity? And then the other big skill was about what we said, communication and teamwork, because it was a really collaborative environment. And they'd never scanned for those skills before when they were hiring. And we set up a process where we actually had either 2 rounds or 3 rounds of interview, depending on how complex the job was. And we had different people interviewing for those sets of skills. Because we said, you know what, you only have an hour with someone when you're interviewing. If you've got 6 technical skills and 3 competencies you're going to be hiring for, you can't do that in an hour, right? In an hour, you can figure out, can someone draw? That's it. That's all you can figure out, right? You can't also figure out all the other stuff. So we split it up into teams. We trained up a recruitment team, pairs of 2s, and we said, okay, you 2 people, you're looking just at this. You 2 people, you're looking just at this. We interviewed people in a rotation. At the end of the day, we got together and debriefed. Okay, everybody puts their feedback on the table. We saw 10 people today. Who we hiring? Made a decision on the day. Interview, in teams, stack it up, round it, make a decision. And it was this fantastically fast process, but really insightful, because we could have these arguments to say, well, what did you hear them say? Or I wasn't convinced on this. No, I was convinced on that. And it allowed us to be able to hire a lot of people in a really short time.
And you got to benchmark them one against the other in very short periods of time. So you're not
who survived, who didn't.
And you're not just left with the impression that person had left 2 weeks ago. You're like, today, it happened today. It's super fresh. More than one person had saw them.
Yeah.
And you the time creates a necessity to make a decision.
Yeah, exactly. And also you weren't losing candidates, because in a fast moving job market like that, if it takes you 3 weeks to recruit someone, they can already have another job by the time you call them back for second interview.
And also maintaining a certain standard of communication in the case they don't.
Yeah.
So you've already moved down from that position, and you still have to deal with the fallout of the tens of candidates that didn't go through and explain. And sometimes they want the data, and sometimes they want to follow up. And
so it reduces the admin work. Doing it this way as well, your admin works really fast, because you're not also scheduling all those interviews. It's just like, boom, everything's done. You set your day, you do it. So for anyone who's scaling up and having to hire a lot of people in a short time, I would say be really smart. Look at your top performers, agree 3, maybe 4 competencies, at nothing more than that. Look at your technical skills that you need to interview for, break it up into teams, interview people, do it on the same day, do a really strong debrief. And that's a great process to use.
It's also a good way, even if you're recruiting for multiple roles or multiple departments, because some of the core competencies are company-wide. So ambiguity is not just for the designer or the commercial director.
Yeah.
Ambiguity is all across the board. So some teams can interview for both roles, while others are specialized.
Yeah, and they understand what to listen for. So all the interview teams had a script, questions they were asking, and they knew what to listen for in the interview. So what are the things that are the clues that the person's giving you underneath that tells you they have that comfort with ambiguity or they don't? So training the team up how not to use leading questions, you know, what to listen for, how to listen. We did all of that, and it was a really successful process and really good. And getting those competencies right is so context specific to the company you're working for, right? So I had a breakfast with someone the other day who's starting up a new practice in London. And he was saying the most important thing for him is people who are straightforward, you know, because he finds especially, you know, people who are afraid to say what they think, really hard to work with. And I said, great, well, make that your core thing. And when you're recruiting, ask lots of questions to see whether or not the person is able to be straightforward and honest with you about stuff. And then make that part of your way that you promote people. Put it on, that's your core competency. Are you good at that? If not, you're not gonna get hired, and B, you're not gonna get promoted. You know, just But keep it simple. Don't have a list of 15 things. Have 3 or 4.
And you know what? It can't come just from the founders or the hiring managers. It can't, because the real underlying values of a company are usually not what's written on the walls with neon signs. So
Exactly.
have your ideas about what these are and then go validate them with the team. Actually, what makes your team high performing? Actually, what got you so far? Actually, what's in common for those people who we have promoted?
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I say look at your top performers and they'll tell you. You can create a profile based on them. And so much of it is you can be a top performer in one place and come to another company and totally fail. And that's not because you're not a good person. It's not because you're not good at what your job. It's because context is everything. And your ability to be successful is a combination of how everything around you is working and whether or not you've got the right match for that environment. And again, in the show notes, I'll give you a really good recruitment book where he talks about this at length. And that's why so many, especially in sales, you hire the top sales professional from your competitor, comes to your business and totally bombs. Very common, right? And that's the context piece that often gets missed.
I think we've discounted the value that HR brings when HR is used proactively rather than just reactively. This person is underperforming. How do we deal with that? That's one type of problems that the HR are flooded with. But once you give them a seat in the table for proactively, how can we solve a business problem through an HR prism? You get this type of brilliant, innovative, highly scalable solutions. Thank you so much for coming over on a Saturday morning. This has been tremendously helpful. And with that, we're signing off. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks.